Hi, I'm Joe Collymore, and welcome to our continuing discussions about Aquarion Water and the water takeover proposed by the town of Hingham. Our guests today are executives and representatives from Aquarion Water. With us today is
Ronit Goldstein.
Thank you,
You got
Ronit. John Walsh and Steve Olson. Hi. And your titles, to be more specific.
I'm with Community
Ronit,
Relations.
You're Community Relations. Yep. John, you're the Vice President of all operations for Aquarion. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And Steve, you're the Operations Executive for
Massachusetts.
Yes. Let's just jump right into some of the questions, all right?
Sure.
Starting with this first one. Tell me about your performance providing water to the three towns of Hingham, Hull, and North Cohasset.
Sure, it's a great place to start, and it starts with water quality. And probably the most important thing for residents to recognize is that our water quality has been excellent to the point where we've got an award from our regulator, the Department of Environmental Protection, 4 out of the past 5 years. And that should matter to folks. That is a very select award. About 19 water systems, medium and large water systems across the state received that award for 2017, and there's 257 in that group, in that large to medium water system grouping. So that is a very select group that gets that award. But it goes beyond water quality in terms of our performance. And it's about the long-term stewardship of the infrastructure, the prudent investment in that infrastructure to make sure that for decades and decades, not just today, but for decades, that we're providing that high water quality and good customer service. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to.
Sure, yeah. Besides award winning, which first comes to mind, we have 15 dedicated employees that work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to bring consistent, high-quality water to the residents of Hingham, Hull, and North Cohasset. So it's quite an endeavor, and it's a challenge, and it's something that all of us here at Aquarion have trained hard and are educated, and that's our profession, to deliver high-quality drinking water to residents.
Steve, let's stay on the topic of the water infrastructure.
Yep.
And as I understand it, the life cycle of a water main might be, 50, 60, 70 years?
Or 100 years.
Or 100 years.
Yeah.
And so what does the infrastructure look like in these three communities?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question because most of the infrastructure that we have, you can't see. It's underground. It's 4.5 or 5 feet down. And it's a network of pipes that are all interconnected that carry the water from our treatment plant in Hingham to all the households and then all our customers. We do an engineering evaluation once every 3 to 5 years. We prepare hydraulic models and we do flow tests to kind of evaluate the condition of the water mains. And then we prioritize which mains we should improve. This year we're focusing on mains that are in sensitive areas and mains that are shallow in the ground. And we have to run these valves in the winter and run water to waste to prevent the mains from freezing. So we're focusing on replacing those mains so we can eliminate that usage of water that really is just there to prevent the water main from freezing. So, infrastructure is very important. Most of it's underground. The things you can see are the treatment plant, which is at Hingham, and our 2 storage tanks. You might have noticed our Accord Pond storage tank in Queen Anne's Corner, which was recently rehabilitated last year, and that was quite an endeavor to do. But we focus on a capital improvement plan every year. We're looking 5 years out, so it keeps growing and adding.
I'll add in terms of the infrastructure, and so with infrastructure, it's all long-lived assets. Some of the infrastructure will be in service beyond 100 years. So there's a balance that you have to strike between maintenance, upgrading infrastructure, and like the tank project. That tank, there was a rehabilitation. It wasn't a replacement of the tank. So it's maintenance, upgrades, and then eventual replacement. The idea that, I know that I've heard someone say that water mains have a life of 70 years. Steve unfortunately didn't bring what we call a pipe coupon. We took a section of pipe out of in Hull recently, It was about a 118-year-old pipe. The steel thickness is probably somewhere between a half an inch and a 3/4 of an inch thick. Still very thick steel. It would be imprudent to replace a main like that. It's great condition, inside and out, hasn't broken. So deciding to replace mains just because of age is something that you don't do in this industry. There are mains that will last over 100 years. There are mains that are made of a certain materials that, like galvanized steel, that won't last nearly as long as 100 years. So as Steve described, we look at every 3 to 5 years, we do a reevaluation of a couple thousand different segments of pipe in the 200 miles of pipe that are in the system. And there's a bunch of criteria that we use to evaluate which ones should be replaced first.
I think just sort of to bring it back to your original question, what is the condition or what is the, how's the infrastructure? That's kind of was your question.
Right.
And I think if you take it outside of the border of infrastructure in general, there's a need, there's never enough time, money, people across not just the United States, but the world. So that's a challenge to catch up with, and this region of the United States was some of the first, towns and cities in the United States back in the 1600s things started, but the water system was in the 1800s. Again, you're sort of, there will always be a need and that need never ends. So I think that's sort of the big picture. It's not to say, that there's a certain rating. I don't know if you were looking for a score or how's that condition look. I would say infrastructure in general, that there's always a need and you've just got to keep on going and make sure that you're replacing enough and doing enough right.
Correct.
So that you don't fall behind. Right. I think that's really the key, and I know that the company is focused on that.
In terms of that focus, I'll give you an example of one of the things that we do. Again, it's something I've heard in the community. People reference replace 1% of the mains a year. It's a rule of thumb, but we don't run our business based on rules of thumb. We did what is called a CANU study, it's a model. It's a very comprehensive model that you use to determine how much water main you should replace now moving forward. I think we did probably an 80 or 100 year run on the model. It tells you how much water main you should replace so that you can maintain a break rate, because water mains do break, maintain a break rate that is reasonable. And we targeted a break rate that was well below an industry average. So that model recently actually, we used it to, as part of to support a proposal that we made to our regulator for us to invest more in the infrastructure. And they looked through that, a regulator looked through that model, quizzed us about it, and in the end, they agreed with our proposal to replace more infrastructure.
There's been this discussion, staying on the topic of breaks, this measure of unaccounted for water, which, as I understand, that as the water traverses through the system, some percentage doesn't make it to the tap. And that's the measure of unaccounted for water. Right. And Steve, could you expand on that insofar as what does that really represent? We've heard explanations about sometimes it's a leakage here or some strange occurrence.
Right. So, like the definition says, it's unaccounted for. So we know how much water we put into the system. We know how much water our customers use because they all have meters. And then the difference, we can account for some of it. For instance, when the fire department fights a fire, they open a hydrant, they use water, they let us know, we can account for that. We're working really hard with the towns, the DPWs, to find out if they open a hydrant to help them with their paving program and to do some sewer jetting or other things. So when we open a hydrant to do our own distribution system, water main cleaning or flushing, we account for that. So it's whatever's left over that we can't account for. Right now, the state average is in the order of 14% unaccounted for water, and we're at 13%. So we're beating the state average. Our goal is to get to 10%, which DEP has set for their goal for statewide water systems.
You know, you talked about hydrants. There was a fire in the town of Hull a few weeks ago that showed a hydrant that was offline. And we all understand that hydrants are owned by the municipality. In this particular case, the town of Hull owns that hydrant.
Yeah.
But it raised another question around, do we have enough water in the system, enough water pressure in the system to support these types of emergencies? John, you mentioned water tanks, and I believe that in the town of Hull, there was a water tank or water tower. Are there thoughts of revisiting that and bringing that back online?
Sure, do you want? Yeah, go ahead.
Very clearly, yes.
Okay.
So I mentioned a study we recently did, and that showed, looked at fire flow availability. So you build a computer model to simulate water usage in the system, and that showed what we needed to do to get more usage for fighting fires. And one of the things was to build a storage tank on Strawberry Hill. And we have already embarked on the conceptual design of that new tank, and we're planning to actually construct it next year in 2020. So design in 2019 and construction in 2020. We've actually, we meet once or twice a year with the Town of Hull Fire Department, and we go over our list of hydrants and which ones are broken, which one we want to prioritize. For a number of years, we've been replacing some of those hydrants for the Town of Hull, working closely with the fire department. And after the discussion about the fire hydrants, we had a quick discussion on the storage tank, and the chief in Hull was very excited about it and started planning all the things he wanted to do with the tank, as far as not only for fire protection, but as a means to mount their emergency communication antennas. So, we said we'd be glad to have you put anything you need on there to help your operation. So we're working closely with them.
It's been said that within this tri-town area, as a cohort, if you will, that there are other municipalities with 13, 14,000 water hookups, if you will, who operate as a municipal-owned water enterprise. What makes this system operated by Aquarion special, and why should it stay Aquarion as opposed to becoming a municipal enterprise?
Sure, I'll start. I've heard that comment that most Massachusetts communities have their own water system, but private or investor-owned water systems are definitely not an anomaly. I think about 36 million people in the U.S. receive their water from investor-owned water systems. We own and operate the water systems in 60 communities in New England, and some of those are large communities, large cities, Bridgeport, Connecticut, Stamford, Connecticut. What that means is that we're able to retain the expertise that you need to run a water system. And let me explain why that expertise matters. So this industry is heavily regulated. Back in 1980, there were about 20 contaminants that were regulated. Since that time, there's been, I think, at least 20 to 25 new regulations that have come into place. That means there's 90 contaminants, more than 90, that are now regulated. And that is only going to increase. We can see in the very short time frame that there's going to be stricter regulations for lead in water. There's going to be new regulations, and already in some states there are new regulations for a category of what are called emerging contaminants. A group of them are known by their acronym PFAS, PFAS. So this is an industry that is heavily regulated, and it is only going to get more regulated. And there's, for good reason, you're drinking this product. So Aquarion has the expertise, both operational and engineering, to address those challenges. Let me step back a little bit in terms of, we don't like to talk about the risk and the challenges in this industry. Our job is to provide safe, clean water for our customers. We worry about the risks. But in terms of the risks, in 2016, 1/3 of the 151,000 public water systems in the U.S. had a violated an EPA regulation. Last year, 20 million people in the United States had their water utility have a health-based regulation. So they were subjected to unsafe drinking water. So 20 million people last year. This is a complex business. Meeting all the regulations takes expertise. We know even at our treatment plant here, we inject 8 different chemicals continuously into a continuous stream of water that's through the treatment plant. And getting that balance of chemicals right to be able to remove organic, inorganic, naturally occurring contaminants, to guard against bacteria, viruses, and cysts, to provide a water chemistry that reduces corrosiveness. All of that is going on every minute of every day. And you need the licensed operators who get that right. But those licensed operators also, they work within a framework of processes and standards that we have developed over decades.
I was a water superintendent for a community water system. I've been the director of operations here for 3 years, and I was been a consulting engineer, and my clients were community water systems. And I can tell you that 2.5, 3 years ago, when I took this position, one of the reasons I took it was how impressed I was with the quality of the people that work here, the experts. And you hear the term in sports about a deep bench. There's an extremely deep bench, not only here in Hingham, but also in Bridgeport, our corporate, where people with 30 and 40 years of experience, professional engineers, licensed operators that you can rely on and call upon when you have an issue. So I think it's not that maybe a town couldn't do it, but I just think that Aquarion brings it to a high level, and that's indicative of the awards we've received for the past 5 years.
The town of Hingham prides itself in the operation of its electric company, and the sense and feeling is that there's up to the task in operating a water company. And to your point, Steve, that it's a very different type of enterprise. What would you say to our viewers who have concerns about maintaining quality of water in our system, whether it's continuing under the enterprise of Aquarion, or if in fact the voters in Hingham approve and thus it's under the operation of the town of Hingham? What role can Aquarion play in establishing some level of continuity, transition for the quality of the water?
Aquarion would absolutely continue to do our jobs until the closing, and then it's the town's responsibility. Yeah, Steve referenced people with lots of years of experience. Steve and I both have about 30 years of experience in this business. We chose to be in this business, while we were in college, and that's what everyone in this company is about. For some reason, at some point in time when we were young, we decided that this is what we were passionate about. And that's not going to change, during that transition period. We are absolutely devoted to providing people high quality water. It's what we do every day.
Yeah.
So that's not going to change.
I just want to bring back to something you said at the beginning of that question. You said electricity and the electric department. So providing water is a lot different than providing electricity. So I believe Hingham, they distribute electricity, but they're not generating it. So for Aquarion here, we're pumping the water out of the ground and or getting it from our surface water supply, bringing it to the treatment plant, as John mentioned, adding 8 chemicals at the precise amounts and at an ever-changing requirement, because the sources will change, the blend of water changes. So it's a very challenging treatment process. So we're pumping it here, we're treating it, and then we distribute it, and then we're relying on pressure. And it's something that you're drinking, right? We're drinking water here from Hingham, and it's kind of one of the reasons I got into the industry. It's very passionate about providing a service that people are using and drinking. So I think it's really good.
I can add one more thing to the comment about the comparison. I've heard that a lot. And I think that HMLP does a great job. They really do. I mean, we're the beneficiary at the treatment plant and our other facilities. However, it's for Hingham. And a lot is above ground. And you have to remember that the infrastructure, again, it's ingestible. We talked about it's an ingestible product, which makes it completely different. The majority of the infrastructure that needs upgrade is underground, so you really don't know the condition because you don't have, and you don't have a crystal ball to tell you what's going to happen down the line. And then the other piece is that you're in an entire town outside of Hingham, where the infrastructure is some of it older, some of it different material. You've got salt water that plays a part in Hull in the coastal community. And a piece of Cohasset. So you've got a lot of other factors. So it's easy to say, it's a service provider. This is a service provider. Why can't we do both?
Well, if you want to kind of tie in the last two questions, but Ronit, you made a good point about HMLP provides electricity to Hingham, and your last question was about the town of Hingham providing water to Hingham, Hull, and North Cohasset, which is a very atypical thing for a community to do. Most communities have, a handful of customers in another town.
Well, not even most. We looked at all the mid-sized systems in the state. There's 51 of them that have between 10,000 and 25,000 customers. Of that 51, I think it was 5 communities served customers in a neighboring town directly. So you can serve people directly or through wholesale. One town sells to another through 1 or 2 large meters. But there was only like 5 towns that served people directly in another community. For instance, Weymouth serves about 50 customers who are on Hingham, right at the border. In this case, it's unprecedented for one community to be serving 5,000 customers in another community. And it means they are setting the rates for those people. It means they are making decisions about the infrastructure. And you're in uncharted water. It's an untested approach.
No pun intended.
The way I look at this is the Hingham Selectmen, their proposal is not only to step into Aquarion's role running a water system, but they are also stepping into the Department of Public Utilities role. So the Department of Public Utilities oversees a lot of our activities, rate setting. They review all of our infrastructure plans and making sure that we are doing the right projects, spending the prudent and proper amount of money, and that we're getting the best bang for the buck, that we're doing things for least cost. They also sit there as the customer advocate. And I know people have asked, well, how does that work? Well, there are some of our customers who will call up the Department of Public Utilities if they have a complaint about us. And in short order, we get a call and we are right on it, fixing that issue. So the process works with the Department of Public Utilities, and that is something that goes away.
Yes. If the voters in Hingham approve this takeover,
Correct.
then the governance and accountability, if you will, switches from the Department of Public Utilities to the Department of Environmental Protection, or not?
No.
Okay.
No, yeah, I've heard some people describing it that way.
Right.
The Department of Environmental Protection has a specific role, and it is different from the role of the Department of Public Utilities. You want to describe DEP's role?
Sure, DEP's role is all about environmental compliance with
And
drinking,
water quality.
with drinking water regulations. So they are there now for us.
Mm-hmm.
They are there for every public water system, and they will continue to be there. But the DPU is only there for private water companies with respect to the business and customer
So in
advocacy.
terms of rate setting,
Rate setting, infrastructure investment review, customer service, all of that.
All the regulations, all of the, so most towns have like a bylaw, if you will, or a set of rates and regulations, all of the rules, how do you connect to the water system? So all of our rates and regulations.
Who pays for what?
Who pays for what, how much do they pay, how is that rate calculated? So that would all go away.
We have about a 30-page tariff that is a contract with our customers. And we just don't define that contract. We propose it at some point in time, decades ago. We revise it periodically, run those revisions by the DPU. But the DPU decides whether that tariff makes sense. They are standing in there, looking at that tariff, making sure that it makes sense for the customers. That tariff, that contract, that doesn't go over to DEP. if the town takes ownership. That will reside with the Hingham Selectmen. So the Hingham Selectmen are stepping into Aquarion's role, and they would be stepping into the Department of Public Utilities. Why that should matter in part is because if you're a Hingham resident, you will have the vote if you don't like the decision making of the selectmen or water commissioners. If you're a Hull resident, you won't. You won't have any way to control, you don't have a vote to vote for water commissioners or selectmen. And you would think that only Hull residents should care about that. But whenever you have a situation where there's a lot of interaction and there's no defined agreement between the parties, that could get messy for all parties, including Hingham officials and Hingham residents.
I know that Aquarion has put a lot of energy into holding public forums, if you will, both in the towns of Hingham and in Hull and presumably North Cohasset. What's been the reaction from the questions that you're getting from the public that's been attending these forums?
I think there's been a lot of good questions. You know, the folks who show up, they're taking the time to come to these events in the evening. I'm sure a lot of people are very busy. So we appreciate that they come to these events. And as I said, there's a lot of good questions. Some of them are, probing questions about water quality, unaccounted for water, water supply, infrastructure investment. And we are very glad to answer any of those questions. I'm sure anybody who's been to those forums will know that the three of us and other Aquarion folks, we will stay there as long as people want to ask questions. We're glad to do it. We're proud of what we do, so we're glad to answer the questions.
I think the forums gave us an opportunity to interact with folks. I think there's a lot of, I think in general there's a lot of misinformation out there. I mean, you know how when you read something on the internet, it must be true, right?
Yeah,
So, and I say that cynically
yes,
because people read things and they grasp onto it, and so it gave us an opportunity. The engineers, especially in operations folks, we live within, but all of us in the utility world, we live within a world of data and facts, and there's a science to water quality. It's not just, by magic the water is the way it is. And I think that it gave us an opportunity to really educate people, and freely. People felt comfortable. It was a free, open discussion. People could ask questions throughout the presentation. It was different than, I'd say, a public meeting or a public hearing where it's a little more structured. So I think that was a good opportunity, and we had forums, specifically this year, we had them throughout the summer, into the fall and in the winter. So it really gave people an opportunity to get better educated on this important decision that they're going to be making.
We did the forums so that we could make sure that folks had information to make this decision. And as Ronit mentioned, we hear things that we hear misinformation, misleading information.
Give us some examples of that.
Yeah.
For example, I've heard one piece that Aquarion may have spent upwards of $2.7 million on public relations. Is that true?
Yeah, the $2.7 million. So we have not spent $2.7 million on this takeover initiative. The $2.7 million was spent over 6 years because back in 2012, we were directed by the Department of Public Utilities to improve our communications. So over those 6 years, we spent, I don't know the exact number, I heard the 2.7 million quoted, but we've spent that on improving our communications for operations support. So when we're investing in the infrastructure, it's disruptive to a neighborhood, we have to communicate with those folks to let them know what's going to happen before and during the construction. When we have a main break, we had to figure out the best way with the tools that are available now, how to communicate with folks. And when I say the tools that are available, communications is an ever-changing arena because of new technologies like Twitter. And if you asked us 5-6 years ago, should we be communicating about emergencies on Twitter, people just kind of looked at you like you weren't okay. So, but that's now part of the discussion. And I know our parent company does that.
So I should note that the one important thing to note is that that 2.7 million was not a dime of that was paid for or will be paid for by the residents, by the customers,
Really?
really.
Okay.
So that's number one. Number
Well,
two,
let me, so
go ahead.
yeah, so that the way that our rates are set, when we go in for rate adjustments every several years. So in the last instance, it was 6 years between our rate increases, from 2012 to late 2018. And our rates are set in each rate case based on our expenses at the time of that rate adjustment. So our rates right now are based on the money that we spent in 2016. And only what we spent in 2016 is allowed to be considered in rates. And so any money spent on public relations from 2013, 14, 15, that money is already precluded from being in rates. And we decided that the money spent in 2016 wouldn't be included either. So none of that 2.7 million, or whatever the exact number is, none of that was paid for by our customers. On top of that, related to this takeover, we made a decision that the legal cost associated with the whole takeover effort, that would not be paid, our customers would not pay for that as well. So,
Tell us about your rates, your management of rates.
so our water rates, first of all, they are set by the Department of Public Utilities based on information that we provide them. But our rate history, since we've bought the system in 2002, has been very good. Our rates have increased at a rate of about 1.7% a year on average, and that is much better than what we see across the industry in Massachusetts. The average for water systems across the state is nearly a 5% annual average increase over that same time period. So we're at 1.7% a year on average. The rest of the industry is at 5%. And that didn't happen by chance. We have very strict control over our operation and maintenance expenses. And we're also very prudent with our infrastructure investment. As I've described before, if you spend too much on infrastructure, then it's going to cause the rates to skyrocket.
Rates. I've heard people say that Hingham has really high water rates, and I think the fact is that when the Aquarion purchased the system in 2002, we inherited high water rates. And what John emphasizes, we've maintained a low rate increase since then, 1.7% since 2002, compared with 5% for other water systems. So, those other water systems who might have had lower rates, they're increasing at a higher rate. So now they're above us. There's a lot of systems with higher rates. So I think it's rate control.
And part of the story here, there is definitely a benefit of being part of a larger company. Not only do we have buying power with things like chemicals and pipe, we also have experts in the company that we can call upon for pretty limited cost. And it's our water quality folks. We've got water treatment engineers, and you've worked with them in the recent past. These folks are invaluable. Steve and I can both attest to this, that when you're running this system here, it is great knowing that you can pick up the phone and you can call someone who's an expert in water chemistry. You can call someone who's an expert in regulations. You can call someone who's an expert in centrifuge operation and maintenance. Those people are available a phone call away. They're available within a couple-hour drive to get here. Municipal systems don't have those resources. They are picking up the phone, they're calling a consultant, or they're calling a contractor.
John, you mentioned there might be other misinformation or inaccurate information out there.
Yeah, I've heard our operation referred to as being a break-fix operation. That is a term that I don't know if I've ever heard it in the industry. The reality is, go ahead.
It's reactive instead of being proactive. So I think break fix means you're just waiting for a break to happen and you're fixing it. Whereas, we fix a break, but we're trying to proactively identify where the next break's going to be and replace that entire water main. So, and that's, I guess, gets into the 5-year capital improvement plan that we continually do every year, upgrade.
Now, and anybody in this business, anybody who's got any experience providing drinking water knows that you're going to have water main breaks. It's a rare utility that doesn't have them. We happen to have 30% less breaks than the industry average for a system with this many miles of water main, about 192 miles of water main. So that's a good example of a mischaracterization. And I'm not sure, the discussion about unaccounted for water.
Yeah.
Our unaccounted for water is now below the statewide average. And we've been very successful in getting that number down.
It didn't happen overnight, I think is where you're going.
And it
there.
can't happen overnight, I think, is what
Took
people need to
4
realize.
years to get
Yeah.
there,
If it happens overnight, that's a red flag. You should look into. No, but we put in. So Aquarion's got 3,000 miles of pipe across all of our systems, and so for decades and decades, people have focused on this issue, and I know that because I've been sitting at the table for decades doing this for the company across all these miles of main, and unaccounted for water. Most people, the bulk of that is probably leakage. Fixing that problem is not a quick fix unless you want to spend tens of millions of dollars in a system like this and replace a whole bunch of water main and see water rates skyrocket. Our job is to do that balance that I described to you of maintenance, upgrades, and eventual replacement. And you're balancing all of that also against water rates. Because if you overspend on the infrastructure to try to get down to zero breaks, that's never going to happen. Well, the end result is rates will skyrocket.
A lot of water main breaks, you see them when they happen because the water's coming up out of the pavement, or people are calling because there's a lack of pressure.
Right.
We proactively go out and try to find leaks. So when you find a leak, it's something that you can't see, you can't hear, but you actually do hear it when you're going out and look for a leak detection survey. So we're finding those leaks. When we fix it, it gets into the group called a break, because technically it was a break, but it was leaking. So we're proactively looking for them. We find them, we fix them.
How closely do you coordinate some of this work with the local DPW in terms of when they open up a roadway to change out, the power systems or new hookups? Gas as a classic example of that. You hate to see it where the road's been open and then 6 weeks later it's opened up a second time. Like, what happened?
I've been in this position for almost 3 years, but I've been going to meetings with the town of Hingham for 5 years because I was a consultant before that. So usually it's in the winter. They talk about their pavement program, where they're going to be. We look at our water main replacement program, and where we see overlap, we try to get in and replace the water main first. Sometimes when there's too much work going on, whether it's paving or water mains, we'll say, hey, I know you want to do that road in 2 years, but
Pave that road
in 2 years, but can you bump it out and do a third year so that we can coordinate this complicated water main project? So there's a lot of coordination. And
well, this year, 2019, 7 of 8 of our water main replacements that will be happening in Hingham are on roadways that the town is paving. So, if that doesn't show coordination, and we are doing those water mains in part because the town is paving, in part because through our studies, we've determined that those are high priority mains for replacement. Right. The only reason that 8th road isn't us putting a water main in and then the town paving is because it's a private road. The town's not going to pave that road. So there's effectively 100% coordination with our work this year.
Right.
What would you say to our ratepayers who see Aquarion as a for-profit enterprise, which you are, having gone through several ownership changes, if you will, over the past 10 or so years? I believe you are now under the umbrella of Eversource. Is that correct? And so for that voter who's sitting there wondering, why should we stay with Aquarion? They're for profit when we have a nonprofit, municipal operated water enterprise. What would you say in response to that?
So I'll answer that in two
Okay.
pieces. In terms of the ownership,
Yes.
I've been with the company for the majority of about 23, 24 years. For 5 years, I was not with the company. I'd left the company and came back. But I was here when we bought this system in 2002. Many of the people who work on the system on a day-to-day basis were here at that same time. So although the parent company has changed, the people who've been running the company, whether it's the day-to-day operations or the engineering, many of those people, the same people who've been here. We just had a change in late 17, excuse me, when Eversource bought us. Mm-hmm. It's the same faces that people saw before that. So a parent company can change, but the people who actually run the operation have not been changing. The second piece on profit, and I'm glad you bring that question up because I hear profit thrown around
Yes.
like it's a bad thing. So the way that we actually make money running water systems is by investing our money in the infrastructure and then earning a return on that investment. So when we install, say, a water main, let's say it cost $1 million to install that water main, we fund about half of that with debt that we borrow from somebody else, and we fund the other half of it with the company's money. And like anybody investing in something, we expect a reasonable return. And that return is what people refer to as profit. I've heard people make a suggestion that we hold off investing in the infrastructure. They should understand that we actually make money by investing in the infrastructure. We are obligated to invest a prudent amount in the infrastructure to make sure that we're meeting water quality and service needs, but you're balancing that against the rate story that I described to you. If you invest too much, rates will shoot up. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I have just one thing to add. So the town's plan, if the vote were to go their way to operate the system, is to hire a contract operator, a private company, to run the system. And I believe the cost of the contract operator, approximately 40% of the entire cost. So if you're going to hire a contract operator, they're going to have to make a profit, otherwise they're not going to be in business. So 40% of that cost in there, and then I guess the borrowing costs. When you borrow money, you're paying principal and interest. That interest payment that you're paying to the bonds is similar to profit. It's I guess not the same word, but it's
the difference there is that when a municipality invests in infrastructure, they're borrowing all of the money. So that $1 million water main, they're borrowing that entire million, and they are absolutely obligated to pay the interest on that borrowing, whatever it is. With us, since we're obligated to pay the interest to the bondholder when we borrow half of it, but at the end of the day, after all of our expenses are paid, whatever's left is our return on that investment. There's no guarantee there. There are times when we don't make money for periods of time. You don't have that when you have a bondholder. You have to pay them all the interest that you're obligated to pay them. One point on the contract operator. Contract operators have a lot smaller time frame than we do. I heard originally the town was going to start, I think, with 1-year contract. I don't know how many years you're doing now, but even if it's a 3-year contract, that contractor, he's going to be focused on making money in that short period of time. We own these water systems for decades and decades and decades and expect not to be selling any of them. So we have a different view on that than a contract operator. They're definitely shorter time frame focused when it comes to their profit.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Jim.
thank you.
Thanks for having us.